Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ved Files. Matt Cochran here with you. I want to talk to you about something that's going to make you angry, like generally angry, because this is a story about how the United States government sent hundreds of thousands of service members to war, exposed them to toxic chemicals that we knew were dangerous, and then spent decades denying that those chemicals were killing any of them. Now, the story of burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is a story of the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this is a story of Sergeant First Class Heath Robertson, a soldier who survived two deployments to a war zone, only to come home and die from the very air he was forced to breathe while serving his country. And you guys, I need to warn you right from the start, this story is infuriating. It's about betrayal, about bureaucracy, valuing money over lives, about veterans who were told their illnesses were not service connected. How many times have we heard that? While they were literally dying from toxic exposure. But it's also about a family who refused to give up in a fight that finally led to some change. So grab some coffee, settle in. Let me tell you about the burn pits and why this issue should matter to every single American. So, what are burn pits? Okay, so first I need to explain what burn pits actually are because if you didn't serve in Iraq or Afghanistan, you might not know. And honestly, you guys, once you understand that what these things are, you're going to be shocked that they were ever allowed in the first place. So, a burn pit is exactly what it sounds like. It's this big, giant pit in the ground where the military burned its trash, right? But we're not talking about your household garbage, right? We're talking about everything: chemicals, plastics, medical waste, electronics, batteries, human waste, metal, rubber, unexploded ordnance. Literally everything got thrown into these pits and set on fire. And they were massive. I mean, massive. Some of these burn pits covered acres of land and they burned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, mountains of trash constantly burning and sending this big, black, thick smoke into the air. Well, the military wanted to use them in a war zone because obviously there's no garbage service, there's no waste management system there, no Sopranos. You're in the middle of the desert with tens of thousands of troops generating tons of waste every single day, and you got to do something with it. So the solution was dig a pit and burn it all. So here's the problem, and this is where it gets really bad. These burn pits were often located right next to where troops were living. Like, I mean, really, right next to the barracks, the dining facilities, the places where soldiers spent most of their time. So these service members were breathing in toxic smoke for months or even years at a time. And the military knew it was toxic. There were regulations about how far these burn pits were supposed to be from the living areas. And there were supposed to be these incinerators that burned at high enough temperatures to destroy the toxins. But yeah, in practice, especially in the early years of the wars, those regulations were ignored, and it was just frankly cheaper and easier just to dig a big pit and set it on fire. So veterans who served near burn pits described the smoke as thick and black and choking. It smelled like burning plastic and chemicals that got in your lungs, your clothes, and your food. And there was no escaping it. You just breathed it in day after day because you didn't have a choice. And for years, decades, when veterans started getting sick and dying from rare cancers and lung diseases, the Department of Veteran Affairs, VA, told them this wasn't related to their service. Who was Heath Robertson? Well, Sergeant First Class Heath Robertson was born September 14th, 1980. He grew up in Ohio, and by all accounts, he was exactly the kind of person that you'd want to have serving with you in the military. He was dedicated, he was hardworking, and genuinely loved being a soldier. Now, Heath joined the Army National Guard and became a combat medic. Now, just think about that, guys. He didn't just serve, he was out there saving lives. He was the person his fellow soldiers depending on when they got hurt. So Heath deployed to Kosovo in '05 and '06, and then to Iraq in '07 and '08. Both deployments exposed him to burn pits. And like so many other service members, Heath lived and worked near these massive burning trash pits, breathing in toxic smoke for months at a time. And when he came home, he seemed fine at first. He returned to his wife, Danielle, and their daughter. He went back to work. He was living a normal life. But then in 2017, he started having some trouble breathing. And at first, seemed like he might be having something to do with asthma or maybe allergies, but it seemed like it was something manageable. But the symptoms kept getting worse. He was tired all the time. He was losing weight. Breathing became harder and harder. And then in December 2017, Heath was finally diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Yeah, he was just 37 years old, never smoked a day in his life. Now, that diagnosis was, as you can imagine, devastating. Stage 4 lung cancer in a healthy, active 37-year-old who had never smoked didn't make sense, except it did make sense when you knew he had spent months breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Now, Heath and Daniel immediately filed a claim with the VA asking them to recognize that his cancer was connected to his service, specifically those burn pits and that exposure. And they needed the VA to cover his treatment. They needed some help. And guess what? The VA denied the claim. They said there wasn't enough evidence to prove his cancer was service connected. Never mind that he had been healthy before deployment. Yeah, and this never mind he had been exposed to known carcinogens for months. Never mind that he'd never smoked. The VA said no. So Heath and Danielle fought. While Heath was going through these brutal cancer treatments, chemotherapy, radiation, surgeries, Danielle was fighting the VA bureaucracy, trying to get them to acknowledge what was obvious to anyone paying attention. Heath Robertson died on May 3rd, 2020. He was just 39 years old. He left behind his wife, Danielle, and their young 12-year-old daughter. And you guys, Heath's story isn't unique. It's not even rare. There are thousands, literally thousands of veterans who came home from Iraq and Afghanistan with the exact same story: rare cancers, lung diseases, illnesses that don't make sense until you factor in the toxic exposure. After Heath died, Daniel, his wife, could have, just grieved and tried to move on with her life, and no one would have ever blamed her for any of that. She'd already spent years fighting while watching her husband die. But Danielle didn't stop fighting. She couldn't, because she knew there were thousands of other veterans out there who were sick, who were dying, and being denied care by the same VA that failed her husband. So Danielle became an advocate. She started speaking out about burn pits and toxic exposure. She testified before Congress. She met with lawmakers. She told Heath's story over and over again, refusing to let his death be meaningless. And she wasn't alone. There were other families, other widows, other veterans who were sick and fighting the same battle. Organizations like Burn Pits 360 and the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America had been pushing for years to get the government to acknowledge the program or the problem. But, the VA and the Department of Defense kept dragging their feet. They kept denying claims. They kept saying there wasn't enough evidence, even though the evidence was overwhelming. Study after study showed elevated rates of cancer, respiratory disease, and veterans exposed to burn pits. But the bureaucracy didn't want to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it meant paying for treatment, and that meant spending money, of course. It's the same thing that happened with Agent Orange in Vietnam. The government exposed service members to these toxic chemicals and then spent decades denying it was making them sick. It was the exact same pattern repeated again, 20 some years later to 30 years later, over and over again. Now, in 2021, comedian and veteran advocate old Jon Stewart, love him or hate him, he got involved. And he had been fighting for the 9/11 first responders for years. And when he learned about what was happening to Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, he was furious. He used his platform to amplify the stories of veterans like Heath, and he pushed for Congress to act. And then lawmakers introduced legislation called The PACT Act, or PACT Act, the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxic Acts. It was designed to finally give veterans the care and benefits they deserved for toxic exposure. But even then, it almost didn't pass. In July of 2022, the PACT Act passed the House and Senate with bipartisan support. It seemed like it was a done deal after years of fighting. Veterans finally were going to have the help they needed. But then Senate Republicans blocked it. They had voted for it before, but now they suddenly changed their votes. The bill failed. And you guys, the reason they gave was about budgeting technicalities. Yeah. While veterans were literally dying, Senate Republicans were worried about budget scoring methods. Jon Stewart was furious, as anyone would be. Veterans were furious. Daniel Robertson and families like hers were devastated. Jon Stewart went on TV and absolutely tore into the senators who blew it. He called them out by name. He shamed them. And the veterans protested outside the Capitol, and some of them were even in wheelchairs, some of them on oxygen, demanding that Congress do the right thing. And guess what? That public pressure worked. On August the 2nd, 2022, the Senate finally passed the PACT Act, and President Biden signed it into law on August the 10th, 2022. Now, that bill was renamed the Sergeant First Class Heath Robertson, honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act. His name is literally in the title. Daniel and his daughter were there at the White House when President Biden signed it, and Daniel got to watch as her late husband's name was written into history as that bill would finally help millions of veterans, and it became law. So what does this law actually do? Because you guys, this is really important. The PACT Act is the largest expansion of VA benefits in decades. It recognizes that veterans who served in certain locations during certain time periods were exposed to toxic substances, and it presumes that certain illnesses are connected to that exposure. This is huge because before the PACT Act, veterans had to prove their illness was service-connected, and we all know how that goes. And the VA would then deny again, or deny over and over and over again. Now, if you served in a location where burn pits were used and you developed certain cancers or respiratory diseases, the VA presumes it's service-connected, and the burden of proof is reversed. Now, that law covers an estimated 3.5 million veterans who were exposed to burn pits and other toxins in Iraq, Afghanistan, and it also expands coverage for Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. It adds 23 burn pit and toxic exposure-related conditions to the list of presumptive conditions, including several cancers and respiratory illnesses. And you guys, this law is already saving lives. Veterans who had been denied care are now getting treatment. Families who had been fighting the VA for years are finally getting benefits, and it's making a real difference. But here's the thing. It took way too long. Heath Robertson died in 2020. The PACT Act didn't become law until 2022. How many veterans died in those? Oh, why this makes me so angry, all right? So I need to be honest with you guys. This topic makes me genuinely angry, and I know some of you are watching this, and you might be veterans or just might have family members who served, and I want you to know that this anger is on your behalf. The government sent service members to war. They stationed them next to toxic burn pits. They absolutely knew that breathing in that burning plastic and chemicals and medical waste was dangerous. And then when those service members came back home, and when they came home dying, the government denied them for years, for decades in some cases. They made veterans prove that their service had made them sick. Even though it was obvious, they made widows like Daniel Robertson fight and beg and plead for help while their husbands were dying. And the only reason it finally changed is because families like the Robertsons refused to shut up, because advocates like Jon Stewart used their platforms to shame Congress into action because veterans protested outside the Capitol. It shouldn't have taken that. It shouldn't have required veterans literally dying on the steps of Congress to get help. When you sign up to serve your country, there's an implicit promise, right? You're willing to risk your life in combat, and in exchange, the government promises to take care of you when you come home. That's the deal. But the government broke that promise over and over again. Agent Orange in Vietnam, contaminated water at Camp Lejeune, Gulf War syndrome, burn pits in Iraq, Afghanistan. Every single generation of veterans has had to fight the VA to get recognition for toxic exposure. It's a pattern, and it's shameful. So where do we stand now? The PACT Act is law. It's helping millions of veterans. That's the good news. But there's still work to be done. The VA is still processing claims. Some veterans are still being denied. The system is just overwhelmed. And there are still veterans out there who are sick, who are dying, who don't know that the PACT Act might cover them. If you're a veteran and you served in Iraq, Afghanistan, or other locations where burn pits were used, you need to know about this. If you're experiencing respiratory issues, cancers, or other illnesses, you need to file a claim. The presumption is now in your favor. Daniel Robertson continues to advocate for veterans. She speaks publicly about his story and about the PACT Act. She turned her grief into action, and she helped save countless lives. His daughter is now a teenager. She grew up without her dad, but she knows that her father's name is attached to a law that's helping millions of people. That's his legacy. Heath Robertson served his country. He saved lives as a combat medic. And even after his death, his story is still saving lives by forcing the government to finally do the right thing. So, you guys, I started this episode by saying it would make you angry, and I hope it does, honestly, because this kind of thing should make us angry. But I also want you to feel hopeful because the PACT Act is proof that change is possible. It's proof that when enough people care, when enough people speak up, we can force the government to keep its promises. If you know a veteran, check in on them. Ask them if they know about the PACT Act. Share that information. A lot of veterans don't even know this law exists or that they might qualify for benefits. And if you're a veteran watching this, thank you for your service, genuinely. And please, if you're dealing with health issues that might be related to burn pits or toxic exposure, file a claim. You deserve care. You earned it. Heath Robertson's story is tragic, but because of Daniel's fight, because of advocates who refused to give up, Heath's death led to a law that helped millions and continues to help millions. And that means something. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I know this was heavy, but these are the stories that need to be told. If you want to learn more about the PACT Act or how to file a claim, check out the VA's website or organizations like Burn Pits 360s. Those resources are out there for you. And if you're a veteran or you know one, take care of each other out there. And the fight isn't over, but we're making some progress. I'll see you next time on the Ved Files. We've got some more important stories coming your way, and make sure you're subscribed.